Hi, this lecture is on argumentative fallacies, or what not to do in an essay. Now that's really important to understand before we begin, because these things that I'm going to outline for you today are things I want you to avoid using to prove a thesis in an academic essay. Conversely, if you're familiar with argumentative fallacies, if you find them in something you're reading or examining, it's a good way to understand that that is not a valid argument. So anytime you see an argumentative fallacy, it's good to be able to know that argument is not valid. Alright, so let's get started. So first, argumentative fallacies are errors in logic. Okay, errors in logic. They seem like they work at first, but they actually don't. Although they are often used in advertising, politics, and journalism, they have no place in academic essays. Avoid them in your own essays. There are many different types of fallacies. Today, we're going to look at many of them. However, remember, fallacies should never be used to support an academic thesis. Okay. You will get a better understanding of what argumentative fallacies are by looking at the following examples. So what I'm going to do is give you 19 fairly common argumentative fallacies. That's not all of them. I think the total list is something like 164 fallacies. We're just going to look at 19. But once you're able to start identifying these 19 argumentative fallacies, it's a lot easier to see the others, okay? And of course, if you want a more complete study of argumentative fallacies, you would take a course like Philosophy 5 or English 103. English 103. All right, here we go. The first argumentative fallacy we're going to look at is called an ad populum fallacy. Ad populum fallacy. I know it's weird. It's a weird term. It comes from Latin, from the olden days when everything was in Latin at the American universities, but we still use it. Let's look at the definition first. So an ad populum fallacy is an emotional appeal that speaks to positive, like patriotism, religion, democracy, or negative, such as terrorism or fascism, concepts rather than the real issue at hand. So let's look at these examples. If you were a true American, you would support the rights of people to choose their own health care. Now that's an argument you might hear a politician make, right? But if you think about it, being an American and choosing your own health care have no relation to each other, right? They're not related. Your patriotism has nothing to do with whether you want to choose your own health care or you don't. I don't know. It doesn't make sense. Again, it sounds like it does when you first hear it, but if you really think it through, there's nothing about being an American and healthcare that are related logically, all right? Of course, they are related emotionally right now in this time in our culture, but they're not related logically. Another example might help you more. How about this one? If you don't vote for Proposition 132, you will be supporting the terrorists. Okay? So again, another thing we see politicians do all the time, striking up fear in supporters or fear in voters to vote a certain way, even though the original, in this case Prop 132, may not have anything to do with terrorists. Okay? Let's look at an example of an ad populum argument in popular culture. This is a little simple or simplistic, but let's take a look. You can see we've got two soda cans here. We've got Coca-Cola Classic versus Pepsi, right? And so it's not an overt argument, it's very subtle, but you can see right away that Coca-Cola, the colors are red and white, versus Pepsi, the colors are red, white, and blue. Now that is no accident. Pepsi is deliberately in competition with Coca-Cola. And the message is, we're better than Coca-Cola. We're red, white, and blue. We are more American than Coca-Cola. Now again, being an American and Pepsi-Cola have nothing to do with each other. That's why it's an ad populum fallacy. It has no logic, right? And yet we are susceptible. We are that is an argument that works on a large percentage of the population. Here's another example from past political campaigns. Take a look at this one. It says, Eisenhower answers America. And that's a nice sort of idea or saying, and we would love it to be true. But there's no evidence in here anywhere that Eisenhower is answering America's questions, right? It's not there. It's illogical. Again, it sounds good. Emotionally, we want it to be true. We want somebody who can answer the questions our country has. And yet, when you think it through, what is he answering? Which questions is he answering? He's not answering any. All right. Okay, let's take a look at another fallacy. This one is known as bandwagon appeal. Now, in bandwagon appeal, it's an argument that claims everyone's doing it, and bandwagon appeal threatens rejections by one's peers. So here's an example. It says, you should vote for candidate Baker. Most Californians support Baker and his policies. Seems pretty simple, doesn't it? But when you think it through, your vote for candidate Baker has nothing to do with the fact that a lot of Californians are supporting candidate Baker, right? You may have different information or different feelings or different values than this supposed group of Californians, which would be, in this case, most Californians. And you should vote the way that aligns with your values, not the way that most people vote. By the way, this is a downside of political polling. In fact, we find time and time again, when polls are released in favor of one candidate over another, that margin of favoritism increases when people see the polls. So whether it's conscious or unconscious, bandwagon appeal is very, very effective. And you want to watch out for it as an academic scholar. All right. Our next example of an argumentative fallacy is name dropping. Now, name dropping is using the names of influential but irrelevant persons to bolster an argument. Take a look at this one. Martin Luther King once had a dream. I have a dream too. I dream of passing Bill 163 and reducing potholes. Oh, that's silly. Nevertheless, we see it time and time again in our politicians. So this Bill 163 and reducing potholes has nothing to do with Martin Luther King Jr. or the speech he once gave on civil rights. They're totally unrelated. But this speaker knows that people are influenced by Martin Luther King Jr. And when they hear that name, they tend to agree. So that's name dropping in action. By the way, we see name dropping in ads all the time. Here's the singer Beyonce, and she's advertising Coca-Cola, and the implicit message is that Beyonce drinks Coca-Cola. But I doubt anyone who spends that much time performing and practicing and dancing and singing drinks much Coca-Cola. Like, really. And yet there she is on the advertisement. So people get the message, oh, Beyonce, she's big, she's important, she's great. She drinks Coke, I should drink Coke too. All right, another fallacy is an ad hominem fallacy. These arguments, literally against the person, attack a person himself rather than his argument. These arguments claim an argument is invalid because of its relation to irrelevant facts about the person making the argument. This is much the same as name calling, so it's not quite the same. Ad hominem attacks posit name calling against an argument rather than a person, but it is related. It's very similar. Let's take a look at the first example. It says, Senator Chin's views on the environment are not to be taken seriously. He's had several extramarital affairs while in office. Okay, so in that example, Senator Chin's views on the environment seem to be related to extramarital affairs Senator Chin is having. Now, emotionally, we might be affected by that. We might be morally against extramarital affairs. But you cannot argue that logically any idea about the environment would have nothing to do with extramarital affairs. They are logically not related. All right? Here's another example. Oh, Greenpeace strategies aren't effective because Greenpeace members are all dirty, lazy hippies. Oh, that's not fair at all. That's an ad hominem attack. All right. The next one we'll look at is known as guilt by association. Now, guilt by association is claiming that an argument is invalid because unsavory characters have supported it in the past. So here's an example. We can't have a nuclear weapons program. Don't you know North Korea has a nuclear weapons program? All right, and that's just silly. So it's just silly. Just because North Korea has had something and we don't like North Korea doesn't mean that same thing would be bad for us. Here's another example. Of course we shouldn't support the oil for food program. Don't you know Saddam Hussein supported that program? All right, so these ideas, they pit a very, very bad person against something they did and say, well, we shouldn't do that because that bad person did it. And that's very silly because logically these things, once they're taken out of context, out of, in this case, these bad countries, they have nothing to do with the bad person or how that bad person used them. Okay. Next, another argumentative fallacy is known as flattery, right? In this case, a compliment is substituted for actual evidence. So here's an example. You're an intelligent audience. Of course you won't vote for Proposition 1345. And you think, oh, I am intelligent. But of course the person saying this has never met you, doesn't know you, is only trying to flatter you, right? And we're very, very susceptible to flattery. Okay, next on the list is a slippery slope fallacy. Now, a slippery slope fallacy is a conclusion based on the premise that if A happens, then eventually, through a series of small steps, through B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, that Z will happen too. So a slippery slope fallacy equates A and Z. And the idea is if we don't want Z to occur, we must not let A occur either. Alright, so this example is a little racy, so if you're easily offended, you may want to mute the video here. This is about Hustler magazine, which it actually may have gone out of business now, so you may want to think of something better known, like Pornhub, right? So here's an example. If we censor, if we censor Pornhub magazine, we will also have to censor Maxim. And if we censor Maxim, what's to say we won't have to also ban medical textbooks that depict the human body? So if we want to keep medical textbooks, we would have to keep Pornhub. So you can see it's very silly. Banning one thing has no effect on the other, and yet they appear to be related through these series of steps. In this case, the step of the magazine Maxim. Here's another example. If we ban SUVs because they are bad for the environment, eventually the government will ban all cars. Therefore, we should not ban SUVs. And the idea is, well, if we ban SUVs, the government will have no control, and we'll just ban everything, right? But that's very silly, especially thinking about the legal system and what it takes to pass laws in this country. Without being able to see the future, there's no way you can logically make such an argument. Okay, next up we have a genetic fallacy. A genetic fallacy is a conclusion that is based on an argument that the origins of a person, idea, thing, institute, or theory determine its character, nature, or worth. And here's an example. The Volkswagen Beetle is an evil car because it was originally designed by Hitler's army. Now that factoid is true. Hitler's army did invent the Volkswagen Beetle. But buying a Beetle today has no relation to Hitler's army, right? They're not haunting the car. Hitler's ghost isn't going to get you if you buy a Volkswagen Beetle, right? In this case, there's no relationship between the two. Now, if you could prove a relationship, that would be different. But without proof or evidence of a relationship, it's just a genetic fallacy. Okay? Next up is a circular argument, and a circular argument restates the argument rather than actually proving it. Here's an example. George Bush is a good communicator because he speaks effectively. Or here's an example, A equals B because A equals B, right? So it seems really silly. You say one thing is because of another thing, when in fact those are exactly the same. And that's part 1 of our argumentative fallacies lecture on Canvas. Look for part 2 soon.